Thank you for sticking around for the screening of Teeth. Now we're going to have a discussion with the producer Joyce Pierpoline and Ceál Keegan, who's a professor at Grand Valley State University. And they can tell you more all about themselves and the movie.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming in and watching the film. I really enjoy people being able to see it on a large screen.
Yeah, I've never seen it on a big screen, so I saw this film when it was first released on VHS. So this is quite an experience to see it up in large format. Can we get a show of hands? Has anyone seen this before? A couple of people and noobs. Who's new to this? Okay, great. We got a good balance. So we have with us here Joyce Pierpoline, who's the producer of Teeth. She has many stories about what it is like to try to produce overtly feminist horror comedy, especially during George W. Bush's presidency and the very conservative era that this was made during. Perhaps we could start out talking a bit about how this film was branded as pornographic. And the sort of misrecognition of it as pornography rather than a comment on the pornographic conditions that women are living in.
Basically, people hear anything about vaginas and it kind of freaks them out. So one of the we shot the film in Austin, Texas, and so the locations manager for the city decided that we were making a pornographic film, and so he actively went around and sabotaged us and our locations, and he told people that we were making a pornographic film and that they should not let us use their place. So we got thrown out of places that we had already signed contracts with and things like that. And then it went so far as you saw the opening scene of the movie where there's there's a big crane shot and then there's two little kids in a pool. Well, on that day when we were shooting that scene, the news came out and everything. Someone went around the whole neighborhood and said that we were shooting a pornographic film. They came out on the news. All day was running. Is a pornographic film shooting in your neighborhood? Teeth shooting in this neighborhood of Austin, Texas. So it was a circus. It was an absolute circus.
Yeah, it's to me, it's more that kind of response. This isn't pornography. This is a film about sexual violence, and I think it's a film about men's fear of women in some ways, and we see that response even from people who didn't want the film to get made because they're afraid of the content itself, right? So that goes into the question of how it was also marketed, which seemed it was marketed as a horror film when I'm not sure if we think it's horror, but the audience might want to weigh in as well. But you said that you kind of didn't really agree with it being slotted into that genre.
No, I don't think a lot of distributors, and I think a lot of people don't know what to do with a film like this, and particularly at the time, because it's a comedy, it's a horror film, and it's got a strong female lead, which is not the norm for a horror film, right? And usually a female in a horror film is young, beautiful, virginal, victim. And Dawn stars out as a victim, and then it totally subverts the genre. So what do you do with it? As well as at the time, a lot of people thought that horror was for men. Mm-hmm. Men go to horror films. Women don't go to horror films. Mm-hmm. So they marketed as a straight horror film to men, And then when men went to see it, they were surprised.
In much the same way as the men in the film are surprised.
Yes.
Would you say then maybe that this film was ahead of its time in terms of the many ways that films can find audiences now because of the internet and because of the ways that films develop fandoms? Maybe we're getting a resurgence of kind of people interested in this film in a new context with like Me Too and stuff like that.
Well, I do think the film has taken on a completely new look because of the Me Too movement, and I wish if we'd made the film now, I think it would do completely differently. I mean, what do you think? Do you think the film is relevant for today?
I can run a mic over to people if you want to. Do you want to respond?
Thanks so much. Actually, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you when I was totally fangirling over you earlier. Is what do you think this would translate to in today's society? Because, I mean, this only was produced just about not even 10 years ago, but this society has changed in so many ways in the last 10 years. Very female-centric, I hope.
Well, I mean, one is, there is a female audience out there that they discovered. Women do make decisions about going to the cinema, and they go and see films, all different kinds of films. It's not just, young boys who go to see horror films or whatever, or, young boys going to see action films or men seeing action films. Women make decisions usually for a household, a lot of times. So there is a whole new way of looking at marketing films. So that has changed. And then because of the whole Me Too movement, you can talk about this kind of violence against women. So I wish kind of, we would make it now, but on the other hand, what we are looking at doing, and I wonder whether you'd like to see it, but we're thinking of doing a series. Would you like to see Teeth, the series?
It's important to say that I think a film like this presaged the Me Too movement. We needed this film when it came out in order for us to get to the point that we could have a Me Too movement, right?
Yeah.
Me, at least.
If we were instrumental at all in that, I'm happy for it. I'm happy for it.
Do folks want to ask Joyce some other questions or make comments? I see a couple of hands over here. Oh, you said you wish you'd seen it 10 years ago? Can you say maybe a little bit more about that? I'm going to give you the mic just for accessibility.
And why do you say that?
I say that because I think that the main character's introduction to her sexuality resonated with me. And if I had had like a different kind of perspective when I was that age, it would have been really good for me as a human, I think. So I can imagine someone seeing this when they're at that stage in their life and having a different outcome than what I had in my 20s.
Wow. Oh, wow. Well, I wish it had been distributed more widely. But what I'm happy about is the fact that we're here today, 12 years later, and you guys are in the movie theater.
Yeah.
So that it still is there and it is still relevant. I was really happy to see IndieWire came out on Friday, and it named us as one of the top 10 body horror films ever made. So it's really great that, it's because of people like you that the film is still living and out there and, and still relevant.
Absolutely. Right up there with like The Fly and all these other films.
Yep.
Right? Yeah.
We were with The Fly.
I felt like someone else had a hand up a second ago, but I want to just check in with the audience. Yes, go ahead. Okay.
I just wanted to say I would love to see a reboot, or I feel like your ending sets us up for a perfect sequel. Almost like I'm not really into the superhero genre, but she has a skill, I guess we could call it.
Yes.
Special power, and she's kind of like
A talent.
A talent that she is apparently learning to control by the end. It seems like her power is becoming more, So like Kung Fu wandered the states and brought justice. So maybe she's a Kung Fu kind of character. And I just wanted to comment on the mythology of vaginal dentata. I think was used more against women to justify controlling women, and this flips the mythology as well as the genre.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's got enormous potential. If you rebooted that right now, it'd be such a good timing in a lot of ways.
That's what we're trying to do, because what they've discovered is that there is a underserved female audience that likes horror. Who would have known, right? So the men have discovered this, and so now it's relevant. But so now they've come to talk to us about it. So it's we tried for years and it didn't work. So now I'm hoping that we finally have a door is opening.
In terms of the idea of a series, are there concepts you'd be willing to share with us? Or like if we were to continue Dawn's story, by the way, we were talking about how I think even the name Dawn suggests like a new era, right? Like a development in the way human gender and human sexuality works. Like Dawn is like a figure for the transformation of those conditions in a lot of ways. I just love to think about. I was pitching some ideas to Joyce. I was like, what if she finds a whole society of women with this mutation and they form like a new culture, right? And see all the
we're
nods.
takers for any ideas, we're writing them down. What else?
And we've talked a bit about how popular the superhero mythos is so popular in the United States. It's kind of like our secular religion as a culture.
Exactly.
And we were talking about how superheroes exist to kind of solve the unresolvable problems of the world, right? They're super because they come from outside our world, or they have properties that are phantasmatic, right? And they're able to solve the unresolvable. And what has proven to be more unresolvable than white male patriarchy? It's this is one of our biggest problems. And it's not really a problem that superhero movies have tackled, right? It's always like a comet is coming, or there are aliens, but never just white dudes are a huge problem.
Exactly.
What was that? Yeah, Black Panther and Wonder Woman are starting to maybe talk about it, but
but this is based in reality. Mm-hmm. That's it's what people live every day, what so many women have dealt with for years and years and years. And so it's now she is the avenging angel who comes in and can finally, do something. But she looks perfect, She looks nice, she looks sweet.
I have a question about the film. It's kind of going in a different direction from this discussion, but so the house, it really felt like a lot of the house I grew up in, the neighborhood and suburbia. Those smokestacks or barrels in the background, is that something that was part of the script, or did that come after you found the location? Did you integrate it? What is the significance of where their house
nuclear
is?
power plants.
Oh, okay.
Mutation.
yeah.
So, And they're
I think
CGI, just FYI. Yeah.
So I think they also symbolize the vulva shape as we see mirrored, and they were really careful. Like the cinematographer, the director, right? We see that mirrored, and then the tree. When the kids first show up at that kind of secluded place, right? We have kind of this vaginal tree formation, and then also that's then mirrored in the place where they actually go to have sex, right? And then so the last scene where we see Dawn looking out from this kind of womb-like space, we see the teeth of the cave, which is really interesting to me. I get so excited.
That's why we shot the film where we did, actually. It's we found the cave and Mitchell fell in love with it, and you know, and it just seemed perfect in so many ways. Yep, exactly. That was the key location, because otherwise the rest of the film is generic America.
Right. There's a hand back here. I'm on the move. Hey.
Okay, this time I do have a question. You're talking about how the film like edges on these different genres and it being marketed as a horror film. And I was talking to a couple of folks earlier who were like, I don't want to stay for that film. I don't like horror films. Like, I'm scared. And I'm squeamish about horror films too, but I was interested. So is that important to you? Like, do people...
Yeah, it's very important to us.
Do you want people who are concerned about like watching horror films, like, do you want them to be able to access it? Like, has that been an issue in the past where it's marketed as a horror film and so it's a turnoff to some folks?
Exactly. And that's the problem, that's the problem that we had with it, because, they think they're walking into a horror film, a real horror film, and it's not. So it's kind of can be disappointing for a lot of horror fans, right? And then it negates all those other people that could have been really interested in the film, because really it's a coming of age movie, about a girl and, dealing with her sexuality. So it really has left out like a whole part of an audience that we could have had. And I think, and that is something that really hurt us a lot. Like, we felt really that the film wasn't appreciated for what it was, that it couldn't access an audience that we thought it could have because of that. Yes.
I'll go over here. Yeah, it's kind of if there's any horror in the movie, it's the horror of just like reality, right? Like, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Just to go off of what you said, so I watched this film originally when I was about 20 years old, still a virgin, all that stuff, and I watched it with my boyfriend at the time. Total mood killer. Anyway, just kidding. He actually had a lot of good things to say about it. But at the same time, I was so influenced by it because my dad actually showed me a lot of horror films when I was younger, and he never saw this. And I was like, Dad, we gotta see this. I don't know why. Because I was like, oh, Dad, you gotta see this scary movie. And we watched it, and it opened up so many conversations about rape, incest, all those things that I would have never had that conversation with my dad about. And it was so interesting to me to have that conversation with him and not really even understand it until I saw it again, until I saw this movie again as an adult who has like had sex and who has, been, lived my life a little bit. And it was interesting for me to see it in a way where, like, yeah, this is a movie about consent. This is a movie about, owning yourself, but also, unleashing onto others. But it was really interesting for my dad to see my dad talk about these things in a way that he wasn't ready to talk to his 20-year-old daughter about. So... But it was a really great film for that too, and it's unfortunate that people didn't have that sort of conversation beforehand, but I think it opened up a lot to it, and I think that's why it's going to be a film that people are going to go back to, because there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it at all.
I know. I'm kind of surprised that there hasn't been anything else done in all these years that are like it, you know?
Especially like within the Me Too movement, all that stuff. I feel like that's a gold mine.
Well,
I feel like it's kind of like the rape revenge genre, but
yes.
it's like immediate revenge, right? So I'm thinking of that one film where she dons like the nun habit, you know, from like
Is
the
that
80s.
I Spit on Your Grave or the other one? There's another one.
But yeah, so kind of
Yeah.
in that genre too. Coming of age comedy, or it's just
but it's not a rape
Yeah.
revenge.
No, not exactly.
It's not a rape revenge, you know, horror film. That's the thing. So, because it is, I mean, it only happens because, you know, when she says no, she means no. So if you're not going to listen to her, then
Yeah.
then it happens to you. That's all.
You just said it really feels like a superhero storyline. Do you want to say a little bit more?
Yeah, well, she is a superhero.
Yeah, the
you
more I
know?
think about it, it's the superhero storyline. Like she's discovering herself and using it for different things, and yeah.
And she only discovers that special power when there is a trauma that happens to her.
Yes.
You know? There's another series called Impulse. I don't know if you've seen. And it's in its second season now, but the first episode is very similar in the sense that she is sexually assaulted. And when it's happening to her, that is what unleashes her special powers. So it's really interesting, but it's very serious.
This is kind of a facetious question, but do you think that the reason it was branded a horror film is because, like, the patriarchy sort of owns Hollywood, if you will, and they're really scared of their dicks falling off?
Look,
That seems to be the scariest
the
part.
everybody who bought that film, they're all men, you know, who originally bought it at Lionsgate and the Weinsteins. So,
Oh boy.
yes, the Weinsteins. I know, I think it is really funny that, you know, it was Harvey himself that I negotiated the deal with, right? And he wanted that movie, and his brother did not, you know, who does Dimension, who did Dimension at the time. And, you know, Bob did not like the film, but Harvey did, and so they ended up buying it. But for international, not for domestic. So, you know.
So I can tell you, it was definitely marketed to me about 15 years ago. I was mid-20s white guy that loved horror movies.
Yep.
And I watched it. I remember going to Blockbuster like every week. Do you have teeth yet? Do you have teeth yet? And finally, when I watched it, I'm like, what the hell is this? And then 15 years later, I am married to a very, very strong woman who has taught me about my privilege and the patriarchy and changed me quite a bit. And now I see it again. I'm like, what the hell is this? This is awesome. And so just really do appreciate the change in view over those years. But also one thing I did notice on this watch is I really love the clothing that Dawn wears. Right at the beginning, all the T-shirts of no sex, and then just right before the first rape scene, she's got the sex will change everything. And then after that, it does, and she doesn't wear any sex-related T-shirts or anything after that. And I just thought that was a very interesting choice.
No, you didn't notice the last T-shirt she wears.
I didn't then.
Well, I mean, there's one that she wears in the house. It's got a unicorn on it. But yeah, no, the costume designer is an amazing woman named Rita Ryak, and she usually does big, huge Hollywood films. You know, she did Casino, for example. You know, and she's been nominated for the Oscars, and she's just absolutely incredible. And here we were, like this little movie, and she loved us, and she came and she did this tiny little movie, and it was wonderful.
It's amazing. We were talking a little bit before about how this movie really does represent patriarchy so well, because all of the women are separated from each other by the world they're caught in, right? Where like Dawn and her mom don't have like a close relationship. Dawn doesn't have anyone to go talk to as a woman about what she's experiencing because the men are always in the way. There's the girlfriend of the stepbrother, right?
Yeah.
Who's also being abused and kind of gaslit in this terrible way. Right, like the world is it kind of seems to prevent women from getting together, organizing, talking about their experiences, recognizing that it's like a world without feminist consciousness raising, or like where you were saying, it's like, think about these small towns where like, if you're a kid in one of these small towns, many of you may be able to identify, I certainly can, right? It can feel like there's no possibility to get out, right?
Yeah,
and you were saying that this movie is kind of like Get Out for women.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about that.
Well, no, I definitely think it is now the Get Out for women, you know? And if we were making it now and had the same kind of like marketing team that Get Out had, I think it would be a very different situation we're dealing with. But, you know, I think that young women do feel very isolated, and particularly when it's in a small town. And, you know, when you see these very kind of like, you know, religious communities, Christian communities, you know, the abstinence movement is something that is alive and well in this country. So, you know, her best friend, Dawn's best friend, is sitting on the cutting room floor. So she's even more isolated, but it doesn't matter because her best friend is part of the abstinence movement. She doesn't have anybody to turn to, which is like so many women. They don't know what to do when they're having issues. They don't know who to talk to. And particularly when they've had some kind of a trauma or assault, then they feel definitely very isolated, and they don't know how to talk about it. So, you know, that's why nobody ever, I mean, it's such a small percentage of people who ever comes out and talks about rape, you know? So I think she mirrors that in so many ways.
Yeah. And again, that goes back to how in this film, the horror isn't about like alien invasion or the supernatural or the gothic, or it's about like the literal social conditions we live in. How we have to, if we're ever going to transform them, we have to really realizing how horrifying they are, right? And one of the things patriarchy does, right, along with white supremacy, is it divides people that could organize and transform those conditions through shame. I think so much about the function of shame in this film too, on women particularly, and how in the beginning Dawn seems to have kind of really bought into this logic of shame and repression, but then we find out that she's actually kind of hiding inside it, you said. And I wondered if you could say a little bit more about what you meant by that.
Well, I mean, if you look at the beginning of the film, she realizes that she's got a problem, right? Like she's like afraid of something, that she's grown up that way, right? And so she is already just afraid of what's going on down there. So she hides in the abstinence movement, you know, in this denial of her sexuality. And so it makes it easy for her. But then she discovers that she really does have, you know, her own sexuality and her own feelings and everything that have been just hidden for so long. You know?
Almost like the whole history of other women, the like the mythos of vagina dentata that she discovers. I love these research scenes in movies where like the book that explains, or I think it's a website, right? Is it a really early
There's
website?
a website, yeah.
Right.
Where like
there's
a book.
That's probably one of the most gothic tropes in this film is like the discovery of the repressed knowledge, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm like that, and it's been hidden from me. And it's such a moment of, it works well with the trope of like the gothic, but it also, and the monstrous feminine, right? Yeah. But it's also so much just about like removal of the conditions of possibility of like politicizing what's happening to her, right? Yeah, so I love that moment.
And then also we're talking about
I got you. Hang on. I want people in the back to be able to hear. Yeah.
All right. So we were just talking about the fact that we also see Medusa come up twice in the film. Once when she first opens that one book, right? And then also the last horror scene we see on the TV, text within a text. There's kind of a cheesy Medusa horror film going on there. So
Exactly. You got it.
we want to make anything of that. No, okay. So there's a woman scorned. Isn't she actually raped? And then she uses her the kind of curse she gets put on her. She becomes ugly. She has the snakes coming out of her head. And then she uses that to lure men, exactly. And then with her stare, she can turn them into stone. So it's again kind of another like rape revenge fantasy.
Is she a monster or not? So, yep.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah. Go here. And if you're in the back and you have something, just raise your hand real high because the lighting is making it a little hard for me to see.
I wanted to jump right into your marketing plan for the reboot. So the purity movement, like you were saying, it's alive and kicking.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe stronger than ever. They'll go after you.
That would be great.
Which I think
I would love it.
Yes, anti-press is now the way to make your film go viral. And I'd like to suggest another character based also on mythology. I think it comes from a German myth that there's a uterus that wanders in the Black Forest. And it was a way to scare kids to not go into the forest, but it also had this kind of, obviously a misogynistic kind of vibe to it. But the uterus swallows you whole.
Ooh.
So I feel like that could be her sidekick.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And it was also used later with the idea that your uterus was floating around and that caused neuroses.
Yeah.
I feel like that was late 1800s, this idea
That's Victorian England with all these problems down there.
So her sidekick could be a woman who dresses in Victorian garb and can make people disappear. Just an idea.
Like it would be like Dawn and then her sidekick Hysteria, right? I see a hand back here. No worries.
So when you're talking about the idea of a reboot or a series, I'm thinking about how much filmmaking and television has changed since this movie was made in terms of diversity and in terms of what people are sort of able or ready to be talking about. And I wanted to know, I think it's obvious that the reboot would have diversity included, but I wanted to know what kind of responses have you had with this film as far as like the queer experience, because I don't remember if But I'm a Cheerleader came out around the same time, but that's also like a very campy, like this movie has those campy overtones and like the horror movies that are referenced in it. And But I'm a Cheerleader was like very campy as well. So it kind of reminded me, and I was wondering what kind of response you've gotten as far as like the queer experience and being raised to be heteronormative and want dick and all of that.
Actually, it's been that whole, like, the LGBT community embraced this movie. So they really liked it. And they've done, and and there's like always like screenings and things like that in places. So I think the biggest problem we had, which is what we talked earlier, was the problem with the marketing of, with young boys, thinking they were going to get something and not. It was a big film among, gay men, particularly in New York, because Mitchell and I would go to the screenings in New York a lot of times and just see who would go. And it was a great one for couples, for gay couples. So. Yeah.
Yeah, the same issue.
But the man who wrote and directed this is a gay man.
It's interesting that you brought up But I'm a Cheerleader, because I teach that film in my LGBTQ identities class as a film that is like teaching you how straight people think about fucking, and all the ludicrous things they believe about it, but that are real because they make them so, right, for other people. But it also got me thinking about how another kind of horror film that when I watched this most recently that I thought about again was Jennifer's Body, which is like another kind of film that is working in a working with horror tradition, but is about like female excess and the body and like sexuality and agency, and a lot of the same themes are there, which is another film that queer audiences tend to appreciate. Yeah. What would you like? What would you change? I want to go back to the question about this is a film with like all white folks in it. And like, if you could wave a wand and change one thing about the movie, what would you do?
The film was all white and perfect because it was making a comment upon that, okay? And having the blonde hair, blue-eyed woman, young girl and everything. And, so it was definitely a decision, okay, to make it into that. There's things that I would change in the film, and there's, and it's one scene in particular that I have an issue with, and Mitchell talks about it now as he realizes that he thinks it's a problem now, and that's why I feel comfortable about talking about it, is when when she has her boyfriend Ryan, right, who she gets along with, and she has consensual sex, but she takes, like, he gives her drugs, okay? And I don't think that she should have had to take drugs in order to have sex, okay? That's all. I mean, yes, she was very traumatized and she wanted to relax, I get it, but I don't like that message, that you have to kind of take drugs in order to have consensual sex. So that's my problem.
Yeah, and it also kind of takes her agency away a little bit.
Exactly.
In that moment. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Any other questions for Joyce from the audience?
Is there anything else you would change?
Yeah.
What didn't you like, or, it's okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, she could hear you. Yeah. And by the way, please don't be shy about the mic. It's really important for people who are hard of hearing that we use a mic. So I know people are shy about it, but it's important. Other things. I'm really curious about we've heard from people who had seen this before, but what about people who, I know you hadn't seen it. other folks where this is like a first time screening and you like want to give Joyce some like juice for her series that she's pitching? Like,
it's just interesting to hear what people have to say years later, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I find it fascinating, so.
Yeah.
And you're laughing here, come on, come on.
What's going on? Oh, come on. There's so many awesome ideas happening here in this line. Yeah.
Well, see, so these are two of my students, Courtney and Rihanna here, who I got to come to the show. So I don't want to force them to talk, but
But your brain is on the line.
no, they're former students, my fan club. Yeah.
Yay, come on.
Just like a comment about how I felt about it. Okay, I'm Rihanna. I really liked it. I kind of agree with what you said about the importance of this as a younger person. If I would have seen it a little earlier, I feel like it would have resonated with me then, and it really does now. And I really appreciate it, so thank you.
That's great. I'm glad it does. You know, I was really, really touched by someone on the, we had to go to the ratings, the MPAA to get the rating of this film. And so I brought it directly to the MPAA, and it was a process. And after we got our R rating, one of the heads called me and said, I just wanted to let you know how I feel about the film now that once the process was over, that I think it's a really important film to show to young boys. It's like they need to see this so they know how to treat women. Yeah. And that always stayed with me, because they're very, very conservative, the MPAA. And there were a lot of people who did not like it. And did not want to give the film an R rating, and he was a real champion of it. And when he called me, it was really moving,
So they wanted NC-17 rating then?
Oh yeah, it was a big fight. So one of the people called me and said, do you have children? And I said, no, but why does that? You don't understand. And, I was flabbergasted by that. It was amazing. But then there's the flip side of it, of, this, middle-aged white man saying that he thinks all men should see that, all boys should see that, So yes. It resonates really much differently now, when you think about it.
Yeah.
I know you asked this earlier, but I'm speaking as someone who this is the first time I've seen this. I am not a fan of horror films. And when I try to put my finger on what I don't like about horror, it's probably a lot of times the films are designed to, I guess, induce anxiety or tension in the audience, and that's probably what I struggle with because it makes me really anxious, and then I have a hard time coming down from that. But I didn't feel that in this film because I guess you could say I never felt like a lot of times in horror films there's always terrible things happening to the main female character, and I guess I didn't feel that unrest in this film. Is that accurate? I don't know. But I enjoyed watching it, and I do feel like it's more of a coming-of-age story, and the whole waiting, the promise ring business is something I grew up with too, so.
Yeah.
It's definitely the same in West Michigan.
Yeah, because it's a different, there's not the tension. I mean, the biggest horror scene in the film for me is the gynecologist office. Because that's what, that's real fear. You are there and you are helpless on a table. And this could happen. I mean, when you think about all of the stories with what just happened with the Olympic gymnastics team, that's it. Okay? A doctor taking advantage of his position and power over people. So,
upheld by the institution again
Yes. Because doctors are kind of above reproach, the way they're dealt with. And, you know, a very well-known, prestigious man, he knows, and everybody believes them. So, you know, so for me, that's the horror. It's like, it's a different kind of horror because it's a horror in like, and I don't know how men react to that scene. That's what I wonder. Like, what do you think of that scene?
Your hand has been up. I don't want to put you on the spot with Joyce's question.
I'm putting you on the
but-
spot. You want...
So, I saw that scene and I thought it was very disgusting that the doctor, you know, would even think about doing something like that. My original question for you was, if you plan on doing a series or a sequel, would you consider, because like the film shows, you know, hey, men, like consent, obviously that needs to be a thing, but to not only do that as in like helping change toxic masculinity, but to the divine guardian role of a healthy masculine. So divine masculinity, the yang energy, which is to be a protector, a guardian, to make sure women have a safe environment. Mm-hmm. Do you think you could possibly like incorporate that into the film?
Oh, but of course.
Yeah.
I think that's
yeah.
a really important element in it. Yeah. It's very, very important. Because, you know, well, one, you have to have that so that she can really have satisfying sex. Come on.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Wait, she can have a woman friend.
Yes.
Or a vibrator, or her own finger.
Yeah, okay, she can do, but you know, but you want her to be able to have the ability to have any kind of sex she wants.
Right. Right.
That's all. You know, and if she wants to do that, that she can do that and she can find a appropriate partner. Because really, I mean, in the series, you know, there's always like, she can have a girlfriend too and have issues with the girlfriend.
Yeah. So,
Oh, no, we've thought of that one option. So, you know.
So to add on to it really quick, if you do make this a series, I think it'd be very interesting if you got a masculine character involved who was also on her side, potentially.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, like.
Yeah.
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 I think because like we want to critique toxic masculinity, but we also want to model like that masculinity is not equivalent with these types of behaviors, right? So like
That there's all different kinds of men.
Yeah, and
okay?
I think men are also looking for like images and models for revising upon masculinity and improving it, and that is men's responsibility, which gets me thinking about how this film is actually made by a man, right? Like it's written and directed by a man, and you know, we're talking about our appreciation for it, but it comes from like a male director, and I just wonder like what people think of that, you know, or what you you know. You have feelings or thoughts?
Did you say it was a gay male director?
Yes.
Yes.
So you bring it up.
We were just thinking about. I don't know. Okay, we're gonna opt to not say it. We're opting out.
Why not?
And we don't want to treat maleness and masculinity as if it's those people are people who don't have vaginas. I'm standing here as a transgender man thinking, how is this film anticipating my positionality, right? Like,
I wanted to ask you
okay.
what you think about it on that, through that lens, if you could talk.
I would love for there to be more space for us to talk about sexual violence against trans people, and like 10 years later, 12 years later, right? Like, how are we expanding the discussion around sexual violence and not relying so much on like a gendered binary to do it, right? Like those are a set of conditions that I would like to see happen, because there are lots of people like me who are survivors of sexual assault who are men, right? Who have a different gender history than you might assume, right? So I think there are lots of ways we could take the premise of this film and really make it like expand on it in these ways to create that conversation that needs to happen. Was there a hand? I thought I saw hands. Yeah, one more thing. Oh, it was you.
Elise's
See,
hand.
I heard you.
I was just gonna say, I think in general, and I think like society is starting to see this. Like we like to see and give people the chance to write the stories that like represent them, and give like women spaces to tell women's stories. But I do think it is uniquely interesting that it was a man that wrote this, and sort of used the privilege that he had to kind of start these types of conversations. So I think this is like a unique case where I'm not like bummed that it was a dude that wrote it. So I don't know if anybody else had any thoughts on that, but.
No, I mean, look, there have been people who have criticized it because, Mitchell directed it, a man directed it, but, he wrote it. Right. So, and at the time, really, nobody had very much to say about it because horror films were generally directed by men, right? So it didn't seem strange at all. Now it's more in hindsight, what the hell is a man doing, talking about vaginas? But
when you said it was written and directed by a gay man, and I said that makes a lot of sense.
yes.
I am coming from a perspective of coming of age with friends who are cis gay men who have shamed me for having a vagina and told me vaginas are disgusting. And so I think it's interesting because I was aware of this film, and I think that I didn't want to see it because I thought it was not feminist, because I was like, oh, it's that horror like that she reads about on the internet, like that she's a monster, that her vagina is a monster. And like I think when I originally heard about the film, it was framed to me in that way. And so watching it and seeing the scene where she enjoys, albeit being drugged, but she enjoys foreplay and she has pleasurable sex, like that was kind of the turning point for me, because she's being victimized until she has sex that she enjoys.
Consensual sex.
Right. I wasn't totally sure if it was consensual because she was drugged, but I was like,
Yes,
that's cool. She's like getting off and I'm stoked for her.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think it's interesting to consider that as part of the perspective. Like I can definitely watch this movie and feel like, the person who created it has a perspective that resonates with me about female coming of age sexual experiences. And then there's kind of that other side of it too, like it wavers. But when I saw it, I was like, oh, I'm on board with this. But like when I originally heard about it, or like the idea that women's vaginas are gonna eat off dicks, like that to me is not an empowering idea. That's like making us monsters.
Well, I mean, it does play with the idea of, is she a monster? She's asking that of herself. Is she a monster? What has she done? Because she doesn't know what's going on and why and how this is happening. So it's a question.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think she's an angel, not a monster.
And I think there's great power in being a monster, actually. The word monster comes from the Latin monstrum, meaning to warn.
Ah.
Right? So monsters are figures that show up to deliver a message about like society going in the wrong direction, generally. And this is where the superheroes are also monsters. They're like non-normatively embodied figures that show up to kind of deliver news about the direction that civilization is heading, or the direction history is heading, right? And so maybe also as a queer and trans person, have always felt really sympathetic to the position of monsters in texts. And, often the real monster is just like reality, and the monster is pointing at reality and going, this is some bad shit, right? I mean, if you watch the original, like, James Will Frankenstein, that's what it is. Like, Frankenstein's monster is like a victim of the doctor's terrible intent, right? To speak of doctors and mad scientists and that whole tradition, right? Yeah. Anything else? Oh, the monstrous feminine. I mean, I'm not a film scholar, but this is a concept that comes, I believe, from Barbara Creed, right? Who developed the idea of the monstrous feminine in relation to, I want to say, Alien? Which series of movies? Psycho. She did a cycle of them. Yeah. And, well, here.
You know a lot about this. Come on.
You want me to deliver the knowledge, but you got to drop it.
Okay, yeah, so let me talk about, I'm teaching Psycho for Halloween this upcoming week, right? And
Great.
Yeah, in this film, the monstrous feminine is actually like the mythological harpy figure, right? So you think about Mrs. Bates being kind of up on the hill, her kind of screeching at her son, and then before we have the famous murder scene at the very beginning, where we lose our main protagonist for the rest of the film, Bates is Bates and Marion Crane, right, are aligned with birds in the den before he picks up this like religious painting and looks through her to kind of peep at her. Exactly. Sort of that close up on like him, the male gaze, basically, a close up on his eye. Yeah, so that's just one of the films where Creed is arguing that there's this trope of the monstrous feminine throughout a lot of the history of horror film, right? And so it's both kind of empowering and also demonizing women at the same time, which I think this film does really well. It's subverting the old trope of, vulva equals gross equals evil equals man-hating, right?
Yep.
And that women's sexuality is evil. Exactly. Mm-hmm. That's all I got.
Yeah, because I think Creed's concept of the monstrous feminine is like what has to be repressed in order for like male rationality and capitalism to come in and kind of run the show, right? It's like in other theories, it's like what is objected, right? What is excessive? What cannot be contained inside the order of the rational, right? And so Creed argues that horror, the genre, is about that repression and about how it's always insufficiently repressed, right? Like where like everything in Dawn's world is functioning very smoothly to insist that a person like her is not possible, right? And she just needs to like talk about consent, right? They want her to consent to a very different order where she would have no agency. But the monstrous feminine is always bubbling up from underneath the logics of patriarchy, and then there's usually an attempt to like smash it back down, right? And so horror is about that cycle.
Yep.
And I do think there's some aspects of this film that are very much in touch with like, I wonder if the director read like 1970s feminist film theory, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because he studied at Yale with Camille Paglia.
Okay.
Because that was his professor, and that's where he first discovered this whole idea of vagina dentata. And so
there we go.
So there you go. Yeah. So that's where he discovered it when he was in college, and it stayed with him for quite some time. So he wrote the script many years ago. He showed it to his agent at the time, and his agent said, "Burn it. If anybody sees this, you will never get work again." And so he was a little bit shocked by that. He sent it to a couple of people. Nobody responded. And then I ended up working with him on something. And then he came to me and he said, would you read this script that I have? And I was like, okay. And here we are.
And here we
It
are,
took
all
us
on the
6 years
film.
to make the film. It took 6 years. It was a long battle, like trying to get it up. It also went through many revisions and everything, but it was difficult to get people to finance it. So, because it's not a real horror film either, so because it's not a real horror film, you can't really go to the horror people, but you do, and then it's still always talking about vaginas, right?
You can't get around that.
Nope.
Yeah. Well, I think we're almost at time. Did anyone else have a question or comment for Joyce about the film? I'm looking at especially the
I just like hearing,
students.
good, bad, what different, what people think about the film. So,
Yeah.
it's really fascinating.
Yeah, it's an incredible film. So we should be thanking you for making it happen and all that hard work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I thank you for being here, and I'm very, very proud of the movie. I'm very happy.
Yay! How about a hand?
Thank you.
And you'll let us know when that series comes along,
Oh,
right?
well, no, you will see.
Okay, great. Well,
So-
thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Yeah.